Good morning, dear students. I hope all of you are hale and hearty. Today we are going to discuss a modern literary movement, that is modernism and postmodernism in literature. Modernism as a literary movement was influenced by thinkers who questioned the centuries, the certainties that had provided support for traditional modes of social organization, religion, morality, and human identity or the self. These thinkers include the socialist Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, whose philosophical studies encouraged accept, accepting concept as occurring within perspective, and the critic Christianity, Sigmund Freud, who founded psychoanalysis, and Sir James Frazer, who examined mythology and religion syncretically. Modernism rebelled against traditional literary forms and subjects. Modernists subverted basic conventions of prose fiction by breaking up narrative continuity, violating traditional syntax, and disrupting the coherence of narration through the use of stream of consciousness, that is, in narrative style, providing the uninterrupted flow of an individual thoughts and feelings. Among other innovative modes of narration, they also departed from standard ways of representing characters by questioning identity as a real as opposed to an artificial construct, by eliminating the possibility of character coherence, and by conflating characters' inwardness with their external representation. Although Victorian themes and authors influenced writers like William Butler Yeats, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, and D.H. Lawrence, modernism defined itself against Victorianism. Lytton Strachey, in his eminent Victorians, punctured Victorian stubbornness and pretensions to moral and cultural superiority by critically examining such revered Victorian figures as Henry Edward Manning, a Roman Catholic cardinal, Florence Nightingale, the founder of the modern nursing, and General Charles George Gordon, who quelled the Tapping Rebellion. A prominent feature of modernism was its interest in the avant-garde. As Ezra Pound directed, modernists wanted to make it new. Victorian realism gave way to obviously artificial structure. To the modernist, the visible space and time are not reality, rather, they are modes through which we apprehend reality. When reviewing Joyce's Ulysses, T.S. Eliot lauded Joyce's mythical method in using the paradigm of Ulysses' journey from Troy to his home in Ithaca to give shape and significance to modern futility and anarchy as Leopold Bloom travels through Dublin. Through this mythical method, writers could be realistic in portraying modern chaos while also suggesting through psychological insights a continuing bodied life that rises in mythic or archetypal patterns. patterns that express the meeting of mind with nature. The sense of individual place in the world became tenuous, especially through the modernists identified as the dissociation of the mind and body. Modernists examined this dissociation through such themes as the inorganic and artificial alienation and estrangement, while some modernists, like Lawrence, suggest strategies for reintegrating the body and mind. Others, like Woolf, face this dissociation with a sense of tragedy and overwhelming despair. Another dissociation that modernists pointed to was that between the perceived and the real self, between an autonomous self and one created by society and the world. Some writers, like Joyce, indicated ways to develop a strong individuality that rejected old values and created new ones. Others suggested that such a strong individuality can make a world of itself and claim universality. And still others suggested that real individuality ceased to exist at all. Such writers considered how individuals could develop honest relationships with the world around them. Modernist itself gave way to a postmodernism that even further questioned narrative and verbal structures through fragmentation and unreliable narrators, among other methods. Writers' intentions were called into questions as literary text became to be seen as dependent on both the author and the reader. The idea of a critical fallacy, where the author may not even know what they are writing, moved away from the subjective, objective view of art toward more of an emphasis on the work itself and the reader's response to it. Textual unity, even though use of the mythic method was not integral to the text but instead imposed on it, and readers through were textual interminacy, fragmentation, and unreliability to derive meaning, if any meaning is available at all. Postmodernism destabilized the relationship among author, text, and reader by highlighting fictive methods through metafiction. When a work deliberately draws attention to its artificiality, the sprawl, excess, and fragmentation of maximalism, maximalism, and the stripping to the bone of minimalism. It also made no distinction between so-called high and low culture through pastiche, parody, and intertextuality, with text commenting upon each other and existing within their own literary continuum. In his plot less dramas configuring cultural fatigue and individual alienation, Samuel Beckett 906 to 1989 rejected structural elements of both the drama and society as the individual's place in the world came to be seen as an artificial construct. The artist's place in the world became more and more remote. The loss of a center on which writers could depend became increasingly apparent with the influx of colonial and post-colonial writers like Doris Lessing 1919 to 2013 and Anita Desai 1937. Diversity in literature of races, voices, viewpoints, and more became the hallmark of the 20th century and beyond. It is difficult to give a clear definition of modernism and postmodernism. It can be said that both are cultural currents and realms of art, painting, sculpture, literature, and architecture over a certain, not clearly demarcated. Modernism emerged around the time of the Second Industrial Revolution, 1817 to 1920, which was marked by the decline of stable social classes, the beginning of professionalism, and a sense of urban alienation. Postmodernism generally refers to cultural phenomena with certain characteristics that emerged after the Second World War. When exactly postmodernism starts varies according to national context and individual critics. The boundary between modernism and postmodernism in many cases is fuzzy. There was some programmatic disavowal of modernism on the part of postmodern writers, and yet postmodernism continued with the developed some modern ideas and techniques. Whether postmodernism should be seen as a defiance, as a definite break with modernism, or its continuation is a matter of ongoing critical debate. There are some binary opposition between modernism and postmodernism. Let us see what is the binary opposition. Modernism adheres to Western hegemonic values. Postmodernism contests Western hegemonic values. Modernism focus on the writer, postmodernism focus on the reader. In modernism, focus on inferiority. In postmodernism, focus on exteriority. In modernism, alienation, and in postmodernism, collective voices. In modernism, unreliable narrator. In postmodernism, ironic narrator. In modernism, literature is self-contained. In postmodernism, literature is open and intertextual. In modernism, rejection of realism. In postmodernism, ambivalence towards realism. In modernism, literature is self-contained. In postmodernism, literature is open and intertextual. In modernism, highbrow genres. In postmodernism, mixing of high and lowbrow genres. In modernism, rejection of literary conventions. In postmodernism, parody of literary conventions. In modernism, idiosyncratic language. In postmodernism, uses simple language. These are the binary opposition between the modernism and postmodernism. Modernism, what is the modernism and modernity? Modernism is a technique frequently characterized as rejection of modernity and all its consequences. Urban alienation, capitalism, changing social relations, and modern inventions. But individual stances toward modernity vary from author to author and from piece to piece. It is not unusual to encounter contradictory attitudes within one literary piece. This very struggle for meaning and outright refusal of coherent meaning is very simple, a staple of modernism. Attitude towards modernity can be broadly divided into the following categories: glorification, rejection, escapism. But mostly, modern attitudes toward modernity were not straightforward. Some aspects were celebrated, the 20th century. The 20th century can be separated into two distinct periods, one characterized by modernism movement and the other by postmodernism. Some consider that postmodernism was a response to modernism and therefore consider them as two aspects of same movement. The modern age, the modern age in English literature started from the beginning of 20th century, and it followed the Victorian age. Modernism refers to a cultural movements of the late 19th and early 20th century. It was about reforming movements in art, architecture, literature, music, and applied arts. While the term postmodern literature is used to describe certain characteristics of post-World War II literature, the modernist believes that modern life lacked certainty. The modernists generally suggested rather than asserted meaning in their works. The theme of a typical modernist work is implied, not stated, forcing readers to draw their own conclusion. While intertextuality was the popular technique used by postmodernism, they believed in the concept of the universe in which individual works are not isolated creations. The relationship between the text and another, or one text within the interwoven fabric of literary history. Critics point to this as an indication of postmodernism's lack of originality and reliance on cliches, on the best works which represented. This technique is Pierre Menard, author of the Quixote by George Louis Borges, with its references to medieval romances. Another technique used by postmodernists is pastiche, which means to combine or paste together multiple elements. It can be combination of multiple genres to create a unique narrative or to comment on situations as William S. Burroughs uses science fiction. Fragmentation is also one of the important features of postmodern literature. Some postmodernists use this temporal distortion, which is the use of non-linear timeline. One of the greatest figures in poetry of the modern period was William Butler Yeats. Another important figure in the second quarter of this century was T.S. Eliot, who was born in America and spent most of his time in England. He wrote about the damaged lives of people after the First World War. He sees poetry and ceremony as forces that can give meaning to emptiness and confusion of the modern world. Modern drama deals with realism, absurdism, etc. Some modern famous playwrights are Henry Gibson, George Bernard Shaw. He was an Irish and his plays were very new to the audience. This is due to new viewpoints of looking at the society which were presented in his plays, as well as he tried to focus on the history of life force and most of his works, Edward Albee, Arthur Miller, etc. Absurdism was the philosophical and literary doctrine of human beings live in essential isolation in the meaningless and irrational world. Okay, let us stop here. We will discuss uh, exclusively in our next session. Okay, thank you everybody.